When everybody was losing jobs, I worked all through the Depression, and that was fortunate. During that period that I began to write. And it's in that period, when I was at Archaeos, that I decided I was ready for my first novel. And it was partly that had Frank's and his brother's influence that made me decide on With the Living, because they were telling me that I must do a novel on Russia and say in it what all the things I had been saying in conversation about communism in Russia. The situation with the living is practically biographical, autobiographical in the sense of background. I was taking chronologically the exact events as they were happening at that time. In the first year, when I first went to college, the students were quite outspoken, and I attended my first student meeting, just as I described it with the living, and almost fell in love with one of the young men who was a conservative and was making violent anti-Soviet speeches. And I felt very romantically impressed with him for a single value. He was enormously, arrogantly outspoken against the communists. In the first meeting that I attended, they were making this speech. He was making this speech which I quoted him with the living. That was an authentic one. That Russian students had always been in the vanguard of any fight against tyranny, no matter of what color. And statements like that, there were quite a few communists among the students. There was an official communist cell in the university, and people who belonged to it wore certain kind of red badges. And they were very much despised by the majority of the students. They were practically ostracized in a quietly hostile way, so that the atmosphere was quite free, just that first year. And I made quite a few very daring statements at those meetings. I wouldn't be allowed to make speeches yet. See, the freshmen, the first year, was not allowed. We were allowed to vote. This was elections for student council. But you weren't allowed to make speeches or do anything until the second year. By allowed, I don't mean by law, but simply by student conventions. And I started arguments with communists, and I remember one day telling one of them that they will all be hung from street lanterns someday from lampposts, and then went home terrified. And that night I really was afraid, because I realized that I had put my whole family in danger. By the end of that first year, there was a purge of students. They began to fight. And that same young man, plus a lot of others, and girls who had gone out with them, but who weren't political in a sense, were all sent to Siberia. By the second year, there were no more political speeches.
Why is it so... I'm still not quite sure why you're so harsh on those who would sacrifice for other people.
Because they don't hesitate to sacrifice whole nations. Look at Russia. Communism is based on altruism. Look at Nazi Germany. The Nazis were more explicit than even the Russians in preaching self-sacrifice and altruism, and self-sacrifice for the state, for the folk, the people. Every dictatorship is based on altruism. Now you can't fight it by merely saying it's a difference of opinion. It's a difference of life and death.
I also wrote 2 screen originals, both of them made in Russia, and I sold one of them, which was Red Phone, to Universal Pictures. And along with the sale went a 6 weeks job to write the first adaptation of it in screen form, because the original was just 8-page synopsis. Now, on the proceeds of Red Phone, I wrote Night of January 16. MGM took an option on Night of January 16, or it was called Penthouse Legend. I wrote it as a stage play, and I had an agent in Hollywood who had a representative in New York. In the meantime, MGM became interested and took one of the producers, and they took an option on it. And I went to MGM to write a screen adaptation, which I had a miserable time with. And I wrote the screenplay, but they didn't like it. Apparently, they didn't pick up the option. But that gave us some more money. Then I finished with a living and sent it off to New York. And I had a terrible time with her because I began waiting for letters from the agent. I had asked her to report to me what happened, and there would be one rejection after another. Our main income by that time was Frank's, or his work in pictures. I mean, I think by the time we landed in New York, we had $50 between us. Frank's brother was here, and so we had someone at least to borrow from a little, but not much because he didn't have much himself. That's when we lived in a furnished room, and that was as near as we came to real starvation. It was much worse in Hollywood. It was already after 1929 and the Depression, you see. So the only thing I got was being a reader, not for Paramount, which came later, but for RKO first, and then MGM, and I was doing outside reading. We lived, I remember our budget was approximately $11 a week, which is all I could count on. My one advantage was I could read several languages, French, German, and Russian. I could read German enough to make a synopsis, and so they were giving me most of the foreign stuff. They even had some Soviet Russian plays synopsized, which nobody would ever buy. Now, nothing was happening on With a Living except rejections during that year. But the offer from Macmillan came when we were in Philadelphia on the tryout of Night of January 16th. I got a letter from Ann Watkins saying that Macmillan wants to buy it.